Everyone, so we're on to industrial revolution. So we're talking about today kind of why it begins, where it does, and so forth. So today's essential question is to identify and explain the factors that led to the industrial revolution beginning in the United Kingdom. And so the industrial revolution does start in England, and we're going to talk about the factors that led to why it started in England and explain a little bit of that. This is going to be a short lecture comparatively because I want to give more time for you to do the urban game, which is an assignment that really focuses on how does the urban landscape change and people have changed because of industrial revolution. So make sure that you do that assignment immediately after we get done here. So there's a variety of factors that contributed to the growth of the industrial production and eventually resulted in the industrial revolution, including some of these areas here. We'll talk more about them in specificity, but proximity to waterways, access to river canals, geographical distribution of important materials such as coal, iron, and timber, urbanization, improved agricultural productivity, legal protection of private property, access to foreign resources, and accumulation of capital. So let's start with the geography. In England especially, it's right next to the Atlantic. You give a lot of access to waterways and rivers that will be able to make it possible for the people of England to be able to get to a port and some sort of harbor that allows them to be able to send products away to be sold, also to import products from afar, especially raw materials that they would need. And so, because of those factors and such, that's one major issue for why the Industrial Revolution happens in England. They're also in England, especially along the Midlands, which is kind of the middle of the island itself. They have large deposits of both coal and iron, two raw materials that are going to be essential for fueling the Industrial Revolution. Coal literally will fuel it because the burning of coal that would lead to important inventions such as the steam engine. And then you also will have iron that's going to be used to manufacture and to machinery that does power this whole Industrial Revolution. They also have a lot of rivers and waterways that are important for several reasons. One, it allows the transportation of raw materials to become much cheaper and more readily available than in previous eras where things were transported via wagon. And so to travel over these rivers and over these canals becomes much easier, simpler, and they can do more of it, therefore making things cheaper. The second reason for the importance of the rivers is because in the early parts of the Industrial Revolution, before the invention of the steam engine, the factories that were created were powered by water, and building mills that captured the power of the water and the streams, and as they moved, would then help move the mechanisms inside of the factory that made it possible. So both of those are good reasons for why natural resources are going to be used in a way that helps England become industrialized. Of course, you also have a lot of social changes that occur in the in Europe in general, but in England itself, the one thing that's happened is you have a growing middle class. This is in consequence of what we call the price revolution, and that's something we talked about in previous lectures. And if you've forgotten what the price revolution is, make sure you review that. But essentially, it leads to the rise of new middle classes that have become wage earners that allow them to be able to use that money. To buy stuff for themselves, but also extra money to invest into building the factories and other things. And because the factories need lots of capital to be built and such, you have people who are investing small amounts of money, many people investing small amounts of money that allow them to accumulate capital to build these things. So that does play a major role in it. And then at the same time, you start to see, because factories are required to be, in a specific locations, especially early on where they need to be along riverways, it does lead to urbanization, and more people over time will move to these cities, and they will work as workers within these factories. And that's something that happens more and more so as time goes on, from the 1700s through the 1800s and the 1900s. So the agricultural advancements during this time as well are pretty significant too. You have new machines like the seed drill, like the horse-drawn cultivator, and you also have new methods of being able to grow more food, like crop rotation. that allowed. We talked about the three field system. That's something that has consequences in this time too, and be able to more consistently grow food with less people because of new improving technology leads to where not as many people need to be farmers. More food is being grown, so populations increase. People are needing work. Where are they going to find that work? They're going to move to the cities and work in factories. So you have a large amount of labor available, which helps fuel the Industrial Revolution. Also, because of the consequences of the Columbian Exchange, you have a lot of more nutrient foods like potatoes that find their way into Europe and England. And so because of more a diverse nutrient diet, then populations continue to increase, life expectancy gets better, especially at the very beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And so more people, more workers. You also have financial and government reasons for why this is, and there becomes more advanced financial practices during this time. Because of this large and growing middle class or bourgeoisie, section of the society, that extra money, doesn't always go in investing into directly into building factories. They also can take that extra money and put it into banks. And then the banks themselves, when they have this collection of money, would take that and they would loan it out to people who would be willing to take a loan from a bank to turn into capital to build factories. And so there's like a lot more banks that are going to be built during this time. And for people who are storing their money, it's an advancement. They're taking your money and investing it, but they're getting interest, so their money becomes more valuable as it sits in the bank. And that's something that all around helps promote this industrial boom and the availability of capital and of money to invest becomes much more available. There's also a lot of government protection at this time too. Especially in Western Europe and such, the government is going to protect the interests of the business class of people. They give them legal protections from liability. And for people who are investing into companies, they could invest into a corporation and what was called a limited liability corporation. You can take your money and give say if I want to invest in just $2,000 into a business, I take my initial investment and I invest into that business. And in that business success, so does the value of my initial money that I put into there. But if the business fails, then the only money that I do lose is the money that I initially put into there. I'm not part of the company in a way that will make me force them to pay their debts or anything along those lines. My initial investment of $2,000 is the only thing I have to risk. And this makes it more attractive for people to invest because you have a lot of potential for reward with much limited liability if it does not succeed. There's also protections of private property that happens, and that the government protects people's rights to private property. And as people own this property, they have the right to use it as they wish. And that also helps fuel in the Industrial Revolution too. England itself is extremely politically stable, especially when you compare it to like French Revolution, and to the Holy Roman Empire, there later Germany, 30 Years' War. England was generally a very stable country as far as political matters go. There's a king or queen in charge. Parliament shares power with them. This is something that had stabilized. And when people aren't fighting over who's in charge and there's not wars over religion or all those things, that is going to help create that stability where people can then focus on other matters. And typically when life is peaceful, they focus on economic matters, which they do here. And then, of course, later on, there's going to be facilitation of immigration, which helps bring more laborers and workers into the country. This is especially true when the United States begins to industrialize more so at the turn of the 19th century. And as a result, you have large amounts of laborers who can come and work in many of these industrial jobs, and that helps fuel the Industrial Revolution in the United States even more so. So here's, in a nutshell, kind of all of the factors that lead to the rise of industrialization. And as a result, the developing factory system then concentrated production into a single location. So factories build into single locations typically. This would lead to urbanization, more people moving there. It would also change the degree of specialization of labor. And prior to the industrial era, they had an economy based off what we call the cottage economy. And most people in the cottage economy were generally farmers. But farming is not something that you do year round. And so, in the times when you aren't planting and aren't harvesting, you would try to do little side jobs and to try to make supplementation for your income. So you could become a cobbler and make shoes. You could become a silversmith and make silverworks. Whatever it was, you would be doing multiple jobs to try to make ends meet. And this is not uncommon in the era prior to the industrialization. However, then when industrialization happens, people aren't farming and doing things on the side. They tend to focus on one specialized labor or job that they have. And that's something that continues to happen even to today's, where people have specialized jobs and careers that require lots of training and other matters, time to have commitment towards improving on that job. And so this is something that happens because of the Industrial Revolution. People begun to specialize and focus on one area rather than try to do farming and then other things to help supplement their income. So that's it, short and sweet. And here is what you need to do as far as identify and explain the factors that led to the Industrial Revolution and why they began in the United Kingdom to begin with. Okay. So with that being said, make sure you submit this and make sure you do the urban game afterwards. It's supposed to be fun, engaging, but also to teach you both the changes and continuities that happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution. With that being said, this is Mr. Henry signing off.